Hi BookTube, it is another time to make another video. It is March the 4th. It is a Saturday. It's 8:28 at night here in West Michigan. And I thought I'd make a video because it's quiet. My wife went back to work after being off 2.5 weeks. So I'm sitting here in the dining room making a video. I thought I would show you what is my Robert Lowell, the American poet, is what I've been showing. I think yesterday I mentioned that I was reading Robert Lowell's letters. I bought this used. I got it in the mail a couple of days ago. So I was reading those today. And I was reading also this collective poems of Robert Lowell. So I was reading this today. It's called my Saturday Reads. But I thought what I would do is go into my Robert Lowell collection. Several years ago, I was at a thrift store and I found this biography on Robert Lowell by Ian Hamilton. And I read probably about, I read parts of it, maybe 189 pages. And so I bought this. And then after, when I was reading this, I went downtown at our retail regular bookstore and I bought Robert Lowell's collection called Notebook. And I read these for a while. And after I read this, I bought this at a used bookstore here in town that's no longer existing. This is called Poets in Their Youth, a memoir by Alene Simpson. This is reminiscences about John Berryman, R.P. Blackmer, Randall Jarrell, Robert Lowell, Delmore Schwartz, Gene Sanford, and others. And I read this for a while. I bought this several years ago. And after I bought this, I bought Elizabeth Hardwick. She was married for 20 years to Robert Lowell, the poet. And I bought her American Fictions. These are literary essays on different American writers. There's an essay on Edith Wharton, Margaret Fuller, Gertrude Stein, John Cheever, John Updike, Philip Roth, Joan Dion, Richard Ford, Catherine Ann Porter, Edmund Wilson, Norman Mailer, Mary McCarthy, and Elizabeth Bishop. And so these are the writers that I collect. I collect Margaret Fuller. I showed you just recently 2 biographies. She was an American transcendentalist. She was close friends with Ralph Waldo Emerson. And she was the editor of the Dial, which was the journal put out by Emerson and the Transcendentalists back there in the 1840s, 1850s, there in Massachusetts. You see my Gertrude Stein collection. You see my John Cheever collection, Updike collection, Philip Roth. Richard Ford is one of my favorite American writers, Catherine Ann. So that's how, when I want to find writers, that's what I do. I look at a person like this, I read her essays. Elizabeth Warwick, as I just said, I just bought her novel Sleepless Nights by Elizabeth Hardwick. I plan to buy next month her New York Stories and some other books that she has written. And you know, I read a lot of this just recently. The Partisans, Marriage, Politics, and Betrayal Among the New York Intellectuals, Mary McCarthy. As I mentioned this month, Library of America is putting out a deluxe edition in a slipcover of the works of Mary McCarthy. I pre-ordered those a couple of months ago. They'll be coming into the month. Edmund Wilson, I have a huge Edmund Wilson collection. Philip Roth, Robert Lowell, Jean Stanford. Jean Stanford was also married to Robert Lowell. Elizabeth Hardwick, she was also married to Robert Lowell. And Hannah Hartnett, Alan Tate, Caroline Gordon, and Deanna Trilling. So I was really enjoying this. I haven't finished it, but someday I will. And so I recently, this just came out last month, Elizabeth Bishop. She was a poet, close friends with Robert Lowell. This is a biography, Elizabeth Bishop. She was a poet, close friends with Robert Lowell. I have Words in the Air, the complete correspondence between Elizabeth Bishop and Robert Lowell, because she was very close friends with Robert Lowell and they exchanged letters for many years. I have this in my collection. Also, after I read that biography by Ian Hamilton on Robert Lowell, I bought this biography, The Lost Puritan, The Life of Robert Lowell, by Paul Mariani. So I bought this. I read half of this. And then I got last week this new biography in Robert Lowell. Robert Lowell, Setting the River on Fire, A Study of Genius, Mania, and Character. As I've mentioned, Robert Lowell suffered suffered mania, or he had psychotic breaks, 20 of them. He was hospitalized and just really had a tragic, and then he would recover and he would write and put out poetry and he would teach and he would go through his marriages, and he won all kinds of literary awards and poetry awards, and he was very productive when he wasn't going through these manias and being hospitalized. And he was very considered one of America's great poets. And she goes into this, his study of genius, mania, and character. That's why I got this, looking more into his mental illness and how it affected him and his creative process. This is written by Kay Redfield Jamison. I mentioned that I've been reading off and on for several months, Touch with Fire, Manic-Depressive Illness and Artistic Temperament by Kay Redfield Jamison. So yeah, and I mentioned this is Bishop's. This is also in the Library of America, her poems, prose, and letters by Elizabeth Bishop. These are her complete poems of Elizabeth Bishop. She only wrote 100 poems, but she's considered a great American poet. So that goes with that new biography and Elizabeth Bishop. A Miracle for Breakfast by Megan Marshall. So all these things are kind of, so when you read all these books, the poems and the biographies, and you get a fuller picture of Robert Lowell. And that's how when I read a biography where I get into somebody, I want to read as many books as I can on that individual. It's a poet, a writer, a painter, maybe a journalist, or an essayist, or, you know, I'm always want to get more into their lives. Like I mentioned, Robert Lowell, he was married also to Jean Stanford, who was a writer. I just got this last month, this biography, The Interior Castle, The Art and Life of Jean Stanford by Anne Holbert. She was married to Robert Lowell. So you can read this, and about their marriage and their relationship. And you can see another perspective of Robert Lowell. The last marriage that Robert Lowell has was with Lady Caroline Blackwood. This was the last of his third marriages, was with her. So I can read this biography. It's called Dangerous Muse, The Life of Lady Caroline Blackwood by Nancy Schoenberger. So I can read about her relationship, her marriage, which was his last, Robert Lowell's, and find out more about his life. So, and also Jean Stanford was a writer. This is her collected stories. All these women that Robert Lowell was married to, Caroline Blackwood, Elizabeth Hardwick, Jean Stanford, they were writers. They were they were intellectuals, artistic, and they have put up with a lot of shit from Robert Lowell, especially Hardwick. For 20 years she was married to him, and that's when he really had some of his worst times with his mania. So yeah, so that's what I'm trying to say, is that when I read somebody, I try to immerse myself into their lives, and I read who they were married to, who their friends were, who their letters. Like I just bought the letters of Robert Lowell, and now I also have the letters between him with Elizabeth Bishop, the poet. And so I can just read and immerse myself in Robert Lowell for a couple of weeks. Read his poetry, read more of his biography. And I found out tonight, in looking at the letters of Robert Lowell, that he was close friends with George Santana. I didn't know that, and they exchanged letters. And so I was going to look at this tonight, The Life of George Santana, biography by John McCormick, to see what it says about George Santana and his relationship with the poet Robert Lowell. So I can look at this. I also have in my Robert Lowell collection his collected prose. I can look at, he wrote some prose. He has little essays on the poetry of John Berryman. I just showed you, I just bought a book of poetry by John Berryman. He, just different prose pieces by Robert Lowell. And you have the complete poems of Elizabeth Bishop. You have this biography of Elizabeth Bishop, just came out by Megan Marshall. You can read her poetry. You can read this new thing about Robert Lowell. You know, it just goes on and on and on. So I'm always looking for stuff to add to my Robert Lowell collection. And that's why today I was reading his letters and reading his poetry. So that's what I do. I find this, like I say, I find it could be Ralph Waldo Emerson, and I have a huge Ralph Waldo Emerson collection. I have a big, huge Henry Thoreau collection. I have Margaret Fuller, Emily Dickinson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville. It just goes on and on. I try to, these are the writers and poets and thinkers that I'm interested in, and I try to find, when I go to used book sales and I go to, maybe I'll find them online on Amazon really cheap, or I'll go to thrift stores or used book sales, and I look for books on these people, Philip Roth or John Updike or Norman Mailer or Joyce Carol Oates or Paul Asher, or it just goes on and on. And I always look for books of letters by poets or writers or thinkers. I'm always looking for, like I said, letters. And I'm always looking for good poetry. Now, I admit, I read a lot of poetry and I don't understand it all, but I love the language. I love the play of words and images, and that's why I like Robert Lowell, and why I read his notebooks. This is more autobiographical prose. It's more about his life, put in poetic form. So I just want to share that with you tonight. As far as my diary, today I ended on page 204 in my March 2017 diary. Tomorrow is March the 5th, 2017. I'll be on page 205. So life goes on. This is Saturday. Tomorrow's a Sunday, a new week. I probably will go thrift stores next week, and maybe I'll get some books in the mail, some CDs. So I'm hoping you're having a good weekend, a good Saturday. And if you read Robert Lowell or you got any thoughts, just feel free to share them with me. Elizabeth Bishop, Elizabeth Hardwick. If you read anything by Jean Stanford or Elizabeth Hardwick, feel free to share with me. So I'm hoping you're having a good night. And until next time, bye. Thank you once again for the subscribers. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for watching. And until next time, bye.